Welcome to the post-screening lecture of week 7 of the course, Culture of the Middle East in the Cinema. This week's film is Distortion by Chaim Buzaglo from 2005. Distortion is yet another film about Tel Aviv, like the ones we saw in the past 2 weeks. It is also a film about suicide bombing, as the one we saw last week. This was also the topic of the film from presentation last week. But in this film, as opposed to the previous ones, the suicide bombing is not part of the story, but it is part of the experience, which is behind the story. This is part of the situation, which is behind the story. And the story here in this film is much less of a story than one finds in the usual feature film. Because this film is more artistic, if you want, because it is reflective about art and the creation of art. The form of art that we find in films and in theater, telling a story by appealing to the visual sense as well, that is not only words, but also, and perhaps mainly, imagery. I will explain what I mean later. But first, let's look at the plot. Chaim is an author for theater who has to deliver a play but feels uncreative and cannot come up with any good drama. Chaim hires a detective, Avi, to follow his partner, Anat, who he thinks is betraying him with David, about whom Anat is preparing a magazine item. Chaim uses the information which Avi gives him about his wife to create the drama, which he then directs in the theater. So this is the main plot. Chaim Buzaglo plays himself in the film, and the detective Avi is also a very similar in real life person to the way he is described in the film. His apartment in the film is his apartment in real life, including all the security cameras. So the film starts with a group of people, each of which is portrayed as not very stable and not very mainstream. Beginning with the elderly dramaturg who is unable to write, and his partner who is juggling between two relationships, her lover-to-be, who is a broken man, and her husband who is an unsuccessful director. And the detective, Avi, a comic character who is not your typical stable person. Also, the characters of the actors in the film that act in the play that Chaim writes and directs, and which is based on his own real life, are each unstable in their own way. You see them all here in the poster of the film. You see here the real life, the filmatic real life person, and the actor who plays this person in the theater drama. So the actor playing Chaim is engaged in an unstable relationship with a male prostitute and is humiliated by him. The actor playing the detective, Avi, exhibits weird behavior whenever he meets with the detective, whom he visits in order to learn how to play the detective, a detective. The divorced actress playing Chaim's partner, Anat, and the married actor playing the subject of her magazine article, David, have an affair not only on stage, but also in real life. So no one in this film is your standard, stable, normal, proper model person. This was the intention of the director, to show a situation in which no one and nothing is normal. And this is the place to reflect a little bit in a more philosophical way about what is art and what is the place of art in the society. Okay, so this is how Wikipedia explains what the arts are, and I will be relating it, but changing a little bit, at least the beginning. So the arts refers to the intentional creation and production of an object, which is a physical expression of human imagination. There's always the use of a media, various vehicles, and this media, this vehicle, takes the skills of a person to create art on it. Yeah, it could be a piece of paper, it could be the film, it could be the air for a voice, etc. So there are various media through which art can be expressed. And now I'm going back to the Wikipedia description. The arts, yeah, in the plural, include visual arts, including architecture, ceramics, drawing, filmmaking, painting, photography, and sculpting. Literary arts, that is, arts created by language, by words, including fiction, drama, poetry, and prose. There are performing arts, which are created by using the body, including dance and music by creating it through the voice, and theater. So this is what is considered the arts. It's not one thing. It's many forms of expression. The fact that art is the expression of human imagination means that it contains all the artist's life experience and all the artist's cultural knowledge, which is residing usually in their memory. So they can reach the memory and imagine things and reproduce and produce them as art. But it is not only reproducing what is in the memory, it is also saying something about it. It is reflecting upon it or interpreting it. So art constantly reflects and expresses the society to which it belongs, as this is what is found in the mind of the artist who creates it, and in the mind of the audience for whom it is created, and who consume it, not in an economic or buying way, but in terms of absorbing it and needing it to fashion their own memory and their own imagination. Here is a short clip from a long lecture of Professor Barend van Hoosden from this university, from the Department of Art, Culture and Media, talking about art from a cultural cognitive perspective.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present our research project, Culture in the Mirror, to you. Very briefly, culture, as we have been discussing it now, this general process of relating memory to actuality, exists in 4 different types of media. Here they come, the media. Not in the sense of internet and newspapers, but media in the sense as bearers of culture. Culture always needs a medium. Without medium, no culture. This is, one could say in a general sense, there are 2 ways in which the concept of medium is used, an Anglo-Saxon and a more continental German. The Anglo-Saxon meaning of the word media is internet, papers, film and photography. Whereas in Germany, the concept of media refers to a bearer. So the body can be a medium, or a building can be a medium. That's how we use the term. And we distinguish 4 types of media. First of all, the body. Second, big group of media, artifacts. All sorts of artifacts. From simple utensils to complex digital computers and musical instruments, for example. Third group of media, languages. And then you can already discover for yourself what will be the fourth. All the graphic symbols. evolutionarily the latest media group we invented. It has been with us only very shortly in evolutionary terms, only some 40,000 years. Since 40,000 years we have graphic symbols. Before that we hadn't. So 4 big groups of media, and here I think it becomes clear that culture education is necessarily, from this perspective, also media education. It's education about how these different media relate to different levels and types of culture. Body, artifacts, language and graphic symbols. In that order. Now we come to a crucial point in the argument, in the theoretical argument, that is that culture, this whole process that I've been describing to you, very often is about itself. We talk and we look and we play, etc., a lot about ourselves. We invest a lot of energy in culture about culture. And this is what we call cultural self-consciousness, or in jargon, metacognition. Culture about culture. Maybe this sounds strange and abstract, but in our daily lives, culture is full of it. Culture is full of metacognition. If you think about the news, for example, if you think about publicity, if you think about cabaret, if you think about all sorts of religions, ideologies, philosophy, it's all metacognition. It's all culture about culture. Culture in which we reflect upon ourselves, personally or collectively. So, this is the heart of my talk, I think, because this provides the raison d'être, the reason why we do culture education in the first place. This cultural self-consciousness, culture about culture, is so important because it provides the basis for conscious action. Whenever we do something, apart from instinctual behavior, as when you draw your hand back because you burn it, but in general, when we act, talk, do whatever we do so on the basis of an explicit or implicit self-image, self-concept. Our self-consciousness determines how we act. So cultural self-consciousness is so important because it provides the basis for conscious action, which is why, I think, by the way, this is to counter the idealistic side of the argument, all dictatorships are very interested in art and culture education, because they know this too. They know that you create, culture education as such is not positive or negative. How it's used is positive or negative, but in order to use it, it's good to know what you are talking about. You are talking about the self-consciousness of people, and with that about the basis of their acting. So, again, this self-consciousness is personal, of course, but it's mainly shared. I think, if I would have to draw percentages, I would say it's 70 to 80% is shared, which is something you discover when you decide for yourself that you are going to go to a very special place this holiday. And when you arrive there, you discover that at least a number, and if you are Dutch, quite a big number, of compatriots had exactly the same very personal and creative idea about their holidays, and they are in exactly the same spot. So, you are less personal, we are less personal than we often want to think. And of course, it's in part human. There's a kind of general human capacity, at least, for self-consciousness. Now, and I think thus, therefore, that in culture education, and culture education from this perspective encompasses the arts, history, the study of society and philosophy. Cultural self-consciousness in all its dimensions and aspects is taught and developed. I think that's the heart of the matter. And from there on we can elaborate for the different aspects of cultural education, like for example arts education. Which is what I do now immediately. From this perspective that I have very briefly sketched, art is not, and I think that's important again in the argument, is not a homogeneous entity. This is a mistake we often make, that because we have a word for something, we think it's a thing. But in this case, that's wrong. There is no thing like art as such. From this perspective at least, art is a combination of at least 3 dimensions. Namely, the metacognitive dimension. Art is one of the forms of self-reflection. But it's a very specific form of self-reflection, namely through imagination. But imagination as such is not specific to art. You find imagination also, for example, in technology, in science. But in art, it's combined with metacognition. And, of course, the mastery of medium. Either sound, or your body, or language, if you write literature. So, and the interesting thing, and that's why I have added that each time, each of these cognitive capacities, metacognition, imagination, and the mastery of a medium, can be found also in other aspects of culture. So art is unique, yes, but only in its combination of cognitive strategies. It's the unique combination of metacognition, imagination, and a medium. But you find mastery in media elsewhere, you find imagination elsewhere, and you find metacognition elsewhere. And the funny thing is that this makes clear, for instance, why there is always this feeling of shared interest between artists and technicians. Because they share this interest in imagining things, making things. Only the technicians use it for something else. They don't use it for metacognition, they use it, for example, to make a faster car or whatever. And the same thing is true for artists and philosophers. Artists and philosophers share their interest in reflection. Although the artist does it through imagination and the philosopher does it through conceptualization. But from this perspective, you can make clear to students that art has links, that is not an autonomous, isolated thing. It combines certain cognitive strategies, but by combining them, it also opens ways for contact. For example, with technical people, with philosophers, with, politicians, or people who work with, oh, here, for example, the mastery of the medium, another interesting example. Dancers master the medium of the body, but so do sporters. So there is an interesting relation between dance and sport on that level, not on these two levels, because there they don't click at all. There is no click. Sporters don't understand. Well, I'm exaggerating, but I have in mind a school in Rotterdam where they teach sports and art together. And the ones who are good in sport always have very much difficulty with these two levels. They have no problem here at all. Because mastery of the body, that's what they recognize. Okay, so far for the arts.
So the very important role of art in society is to show the society itself, to show the society what it is. And this is made possible through an artist who is a person observant of the culture and able to externalize their imagination onto a medium to create the artistic artifact. So what does all this have to do with Chaim Buzaglo's film Distortion? The film was created in 2005 and takes place in Tel Aviv. It is similar to another film which celebrates Tel Aviv, The Bubble. The two films were also created in a close time period, which was typified in Israeli history and culture as the period in which many suicide attacks took place, and many of them were in Tel Aviv. If we compare the story aspect of the two films, we find that in the bubble, the suicide attack was the high point of the story. The story is about a good and lovable group of people, both Jews and Arabs, whose normal life was disturbed because of the situation. As they couldn't solve the obstacles, they were each led to solve their individual problems in the best way they could. Regarding Ashraf and Noam, they had no solution, so they chose suicide as the way to overcome their difficulty. The Palestinian people in the film also struggled to keep up normal way of life, being disturbed by the Israeli occupation on the one hand. This is Ranna, Ashraf's sister, who is killed by the Israeli army, and her husband Jihad, who is perhaps pushed to radicalism by the occupation. And on the other hand, by the non-progressive, if we take secular point of view, lack of freedom for sexual choice, from which Ashraf suffers not only by his society as a whole, but also by his sister, his beloved sister. So the film has a normal way of life at its base, and this way of life is disturbed by the situation, and thus the tragedy is created. In contrast to this, in Distortion, there is no normal. Not one of the people you see in the in the films is simply lovable, clear, bright, optimistic, and can serve as a model for the good life. The director and the drama writer Haim, played by himself, is a sloppy, neglected, middle-aged man who does not succeed in doing his work as an author, which is expected to be driven by passion, of which we see nothing in the film. His wife, of which we know not too much, we have no idea what really drives her, and we are not sure what she knows, except be obsessed about the affair with the subject of her magazine item. Chaim also doesn't know what drives his wife. The detective, a person obsessed with his work to a disturbing level, who seems to juggle between being sharp on the one hand to completely lacking self awareness on the other, and so on and so forth with all characters in the film. Everyone has their own distortion. It is typical to Bozaglo to give voice to the non hegemonic reality in his films, such as prisoners, poor people, etc. But in this particular films, he goes beyond the unvoiced to the suggestion that even a normative life, the hegemonic way of life that thinks of itself as normal, is seriously disturbed. Buzaglo is challenging here the very concept of normative. So this film, as a form of art, puts a mirror in front of our faces and tells us that what we think is the normative way of life, albeit sometimes disturbed by problems, but these can usually be solved, or else they end up in a tragedy. All of this does not really exist, says the film Distortion. There's no normal. The normative does not really exist, and the disturbances, suicide attacks in this case, are always there. And they don't really change much, only add to the general disturbance of everyone. The suicide attack in Bozaglo's film are not a high point of the plot. They are part of everyday life rhythm, just as waking up, brushing teeth, taking the daily medicine, etc. So Buzaglo's film is not about suicide attacks. It is about how life is not what we think it is and what we think it is supposed to be. In this respect, this film serves an artistic role of mirroring reality back to us and thus enabling us to reflect upon it. But this is not the end. The film goes even further by creating within the film as an art form yet another art form, the theater. In the theater play within the movie, the reality of the movie, which is a reflection of the real reality, is reflected again. It makes all the characters in the film, the actors who play in the theater piece, and the audience who came to watch them, and remember that the place of audience and actors is reversed in some part of the play. So both actors and audience reflect on their own life, while watching the play or while working on the play. And we, as watchers of the film, see them do that and recognize that we too, when watching the film or a theater piece, can reflect on our own life. Are we living in a similar story? Or is our life better? Is it really better? So while watching the film, we learn about art as a concept and its role in society. The film tells us about art, since we see how art makes the characters in the film reflect about their own life. Let us return now to real life, to other films which are less reflective and don't challenge the normality and don't make us reflect so much. Such forms of art, like this normative, more normal films, present to us the collective normality, what is collectively considered a normal life with its normal problems and normal solutions. This would be the regular feature film, not this one which makes us reflect about art and about our reality. The other films, the standard films, are not necessarily untrue or emotionally shallow, but such films are what helps shape our collective imagination and socialize us into the hegemonic narrative. Such films are usually less disturbing than Buzaglo's Distortion. But Buzaglo's film is exceptional in the course, as I said. We will not usually engage in such reflective, philosophical, or, if you want, artistic films. Most of our films are such that can teach us about the hegemonic voices in the Middle East and in Middle Eastern societies, which is what we want to learn in this course. I just thought that some level of reflection about the cinematic art form should also be an inherent part of a cinema course. But your assignment this week is still in this more reflective philosophical line. I would like you to please give a short example of an artistic artifact of any of the arts and tell how it interacts with cultural reality. What does it want to show? What does it want to reflect? How does it want the audience to react or to take part in it, as it happens in the more current artistic forms? And then, what do you think about the idea that art mirrors the cultural reality and makes the audience reflect? Do you think there is another role to art in society? I would just like to hear this. This is not, of course, a question of right or wrong. I really am interested in your opinion. But still, the assignment should be around 500 words long. Submit it to the assignment button found directly below this lecture or in the week 7 button in the submissions section on Nestor by the 24th of October, so before the exam period at midnight. Thank you very much for listening.